right. So, this is our annual prophecy update. Um, we need to turn off the monitor from ProPresenter so it will show the PowerPoint. Poor Patrick is usually in the youth group by this time. So every year we do this thing, this strange thing we call a prophecy update. And why we do it, well, it kind of harkens back to the days, gosh, this shows how old I am. Years ago, Deb and I used to go down to Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa. It's back in the late 70s. And every year, this is one of the things that Pastor Chuck used to do every year. Did anybody else used to go to the prophecy updates on Calvary Costa Mesa? A few of us remember those days. And of course, Deb does, because I just mentioned her name. And we used to hear in the evenings the most amazing, wonderful messages where Chuck would take some of the things that, there we go. He would talk about things from the last year's events, and also some things where I don't know where he came up with this stuff, because he had inside information or something, I don't know. But he used to talk about our future and how the events happening around us spoke of the days we live in, how the Bible speaks about the days we lived in. So ever since we started the church almost 20 years ago, we've been doing this every year because I thought, hey, it's a cool thing. So this morning we're going to look at a couple areas out of the news, about 3 or 4 different nations, and then we'll kind of try to wrap this up in a package. First, I want to talk about the nation of Syria. One of the bigger tragedies playing out on the world stage is the civil war that's going on in Syria. To date, more than 130,000 people have died. 130,000 people. That's a lot of people. More than 2 million Syrians have fled their nation, are no longer living in Syria. They've fled to the neighboring countries. An estimated 5 million people have moved out of their houses and moved somewhere else within Syria. They've been displaced from the normal homes. It's a tragedy going on in Syria. We have verified that President Bashar Assad has used chemical weapons against his own people. That came out a few months ago. The U.S., France, Great Britain, they were close to stepping in with a military action. Remember the talk about President Obama's red line, and they've crossed the red line, and will he respond and all? And then the Russians stepped in at the last minute and brokered a plan to have Syria give up its chemical weapons, but to still allow Bashar Assad to stay in power. The Russians back Assad, and they have reasons for it. They're not all bad reasons. The U.S. and its allies back the rebels. And I got to tell you, when you look at both sides are filled with evil, wicked, mean, nasty people. There are no guys in white hats in this thing. None at all, or not that I know of. I'll play a news clip.
This just in, the Syria stuff is way old. I mean Old Testament old. That's how old I'm talking about. Don't laugh. Some biblical scholars say it's all there in black and white, like this spooky passage from Isaiah 17 about Syria itself. Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. That's a couple of thousand years ago. Another passage warns of growing unrest in Egypt and the rise of a fierce king. Still, are any of these writings presaging events today, or merely incidents that already happened centuries ago? After all, Damascus has been overrun countless times, a little more than years after these writings, by, in this case, the Assyrians back in 732 BC. But they are uncanny and they are kind of scary, aren't they? Joel Rosenberg is author of Damascus Countdown and is known for his biblical insights. And a lot of this reads very spooky, Joel. What do you make of it?
It is very interesting. These are prophecies more than 2,700 years old, some of them, but they have not actually been fulfilled. Damascus has certainly been attacked. It's been conquered, and as it was in 732 BC. And Isaiah, the Hebrew prophet, prophesied that it would be conquered in 732 by the Assyrian king, and that's exactly what happened in his lifetime. But Isaiah 17 was written after those prophecies, that came in Isaiah 7 and 8. And so it has not happened. And in fact, this prophecy, as you just pointed out, talks about the complete and utter destruction of Damascus. That's an end times or eschatological prophecy paralleled with Jeremiah 49.
Now, let me slow it down a little bit. The main prophecy that Joel is talking about, Isaiah 17:1, says, "The burden against Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will be a ruinous heap." And some scholars believe that this was something already fulfilled in 732 BC when the Assyrians conquered Syria. Assyrians, Syria. The only problem with that is that it wasn't wiped out. They were conquered, but Damascus is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It's never been wiped out. It's been conquered many times, but the fulfillment of this prophecy hasn't happened. And so Joel Rosenberg has suggested, and I think there's some merit to it, that perhaps this is something yet future. And if you follow the rest of the passage, it goes on to talk about a time of great difficulty for Israel as well, perhaps speaking about the end times. So could we be on the threshold of Isaiah 17 being fulfilled? If Damascus is obliterated, well, yeah, maybe. And we would be in quite some interesting times if that happens. That's just something to think about. I am not predicting the future. Let me straighten something out here. I don't predict the future. All I want to do is point out some possibilities and show how some of these ancient scriptures actually speak about the days that we live in. Now, there's the nation of Iran. We've talked about this over the last few years, almost every year for about 10 years. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, there is a war predicted one day between Israel and a coalition of nations. One of the more prominent nations in the coalition is Iran. We call this war the Gog-Magog War. God says that he will cause a leader he calls Gog, who is from the land of Magog. He will cause this leader to invade Israel. Ezekiel 38 says, "I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet." So among the nations listed, one of them is Persia. And by the way, if you read on through Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war that's described, it kind of sounds like a nuclear war. That's the way it kind of sounds. I may be wrong, but that's the way it kind of looks if you read through those chapters. And so over the last decade, the leaders of Iran have made no secret of the fact that they hope to one day destroy the nation of Israel. And their latest efforts have been to produce a nuclear weapon for the sole purpose of wiping out Israel. The world's biggest concern, everybody else's biggest concern, is that Israel will launch a preemptive attack and end up drawing the whole world into a war, because everybody's lined up on the various sides here. This November, that's like 2 months ago, Secretary of State John Kerry announced an agreement between Iran and a group of world powers to halt their production, Iran's production of nuclear weapons. Here's John Kerry.
This is only the first step, but it is a first step that guarantees while you take the second step and move towards a comprehensive agreement, Iran's fundamentals of its program are not able to progress. Fordow, Natanz, Iraq, and other centrifuges and other things that matter. So that is a critical first step. And I will say to all of you that as we conclude this first round of negotiation with the beginning of the possibility of a much broader accomplishment down the road, It is our responsibility to be as firmly committed to diplomacy and as relentless in our resolve over the years as we have been to bring the concerted pressure that brought us to this moment. For the Iranian government, it's their responsibility to recognize that this first phase is a very simple test. Many times, Iran, I think you heard the foreign minister here tonight reiterate that they have a peaceful program. That's their only intention. Folks, it is not hard to prove peaceful intent if that's what you want to do. We are anxious to try to make certain that this deal ultimately will do exactly that. Prove it.
Now, you recall that? You recall that moment this year? I hope you've been following the news. The world kind of seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief when this came out, because we all kind of, thought we're stepping a step away from nuclear war. But the truth is, there hasn't been an actual agreement yet. The specifics of the agreement aren't supposed to even be decided until early this year. Iran has even come out in the press disputing what the proposal is all about. I want to tell you that we, as Christians, have a responsibility to be praying for our leaders. We need to be praying for Secretary of State John Kerry. We need to be praying for our president. We need to be asking God for wisdom for them. I don't doubt that their intentions are good. I'm just concerned that they may not be handling it in a wise way. I may be wrong. To me, this reminds me too much. I've been reading, I like to read history. And this last year, one of the things I've been reading through was taking myself through World War II, especially focusing on Sir Winston Churchill. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And prior to World War II, most of us weren't around then. But some of you older saints, I don't know if any of you would recall this, but Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of England, the world was tired of war because of World War I. And so when Hitler came on the world scene, the world wanted to do everything but have a war. And so there was this doctrine of appeasement, of trying to make Hitler happy. What ended up happening is that they gave him time to build up his armies to the point where then when he started launching his attacks, running through Poland and breaking all of his agreements, we allowed him to do that. My concern is, are we doing the same thing with Iran? I don't know. We need to pray for our leaders. You know what? Don't throw stones at them. Pray for them. You know what? If you were in their place, I don't know if you'd do any better. I would have started World War III 20 years ago. I mean, aren't you glad I'm not in charge? I'm glad I'm not in charge. In December, just a week after the proposal, an Israeli intelligence official came forward to say that they believe that Iran is now a, quote, nuclear threshold state. I've came across some sources that say that because Iran didn't dismantle, they haven't dismantled anything. All they've done is stop the program. And the suggestion has been made that they are about 2 weeks away from producing a weapon. And so if they start up their centrifuges again, they could be within 2 weeks, they could be producing a bomb. I saw another source that said that they are close on the cusp of being able to do 30 bombs a year. That's kind of scary. I hope that scares you. It kind of scares me a little bit. Israeli sources have indicated that when this framework for an Iran nuclear deal is in place, see, the world thinks that if there's a deal in place that Israel will back off. But some of the leaders in Israel have said that actually they're more likely to attack quicker because if Iran were to restart their program, Israel is faced with annihilation if they don't do something. For us, it's half a world away. What's the big deal, we say? Why should we get all caught up in their problems? But if you're an Israeli, and you're faced with the possibility that there's a nation that has told the world that they want you gone, wiped out, don't you think they want to do something about it? And if Israel launches a preemptive attack, I think we could get drawn into Ezekiel 38 and 39. I think that's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you could see those kind of dominoes falling into place. You understand what I'm saying? So that's Iran. I want to talk next about the mark. Now, this is always a fun thing. Everybody likes to talk about the mark of the beast on these kind of things. So we'll talk about it. Why not? Let's have some fun. There is an individual who will be coming onto the world stage, known in prophetic circles as the false prophet. He's kind of like the sidekick to the Antichrist. He's the media guy for the Antichrist. He's the leader of the false religion under the Antichrist. And he's going to bring this mark into the world. Revelation 13 says, he causes all, both small and great, this false prophet, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark. Where's Mark? Okay, we've slowed down. Oh, nope. Could we try clicking on that screen over there? Yeah, just click. Okay, we're good. Very good. To receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, so that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. And at that point, we all go, ooh, okay. Now, the Greek word that's translated mark, charagma, it means a stamp or an imprinted mark. It's something like the mark of a branding iron or it's used at times for this, like a branding iron on an animal. Now, this year, there's been some interesting, fun developments about things that could become the mark. In particularly, one of the new advances in science are what we call electronic tattoos. And they would be used for what we call authentication. Authentication. How many of you have computers or smartphones? It's okay. You can all raise your hand. It's okay. If you don't raise your hand, oh, wow, they don't have a computer. Okay. And with your computer, how many of you have heard of things called passwords? Okay. How many of you have ever struggled with forgetting your password? And you go onto Amazon and want to buy something, and they say, enter your password. And you go, Wilma, what's the password? I forgot, and you have to go through that whole thing, okay? So wouldn't it be nice if somebody could figure out a way so that you don't have to keep re-entering your password? Because the password is what authenticates you to be who you are. That's what authentication is all about. So let me introduce you to a gal. She's really smart. Her name is Regina Dugan. She's brilliant. She was part of her resume. She was the first female director of DARPA. That's the defense research people that think up all the cool stuff, She was the first female director of it. She now works for Google.
Well, a researcher at the University of Illinois, his name is Dr. Rogers, what he discovered is that he could use standard CMOS techniques to make islands of high-performance silicon connected by accordion-like structures that would allow it to stretch up to 200% and still be performing. And what he did is he founded a company and they started making electronic tattoos. So I'm wearing one here on my arm.
Do we have
Here.
a camera to get a...
This is a developmental system made by MC10, and it has an antenna and some sensors embedded in it. And what we plan to do is work with them to advance a tattoo that could be used for authentication. Now, it may be true that 10 to 20-year-olds don't want to wear a watch on their wrist, but you can be sure that they'll be far more interested in wearing an electronic tattoo, if only to piss off their parents. Right?
And that can have a design, right? Because
Sure.
they would certainly want some kind of cool design.
Options.
Now, how many of you are 10 to 20 years old in here? Nobody's going to dare raise your hand. Chris, put your hand down. You're too old for that. Now, I don't know. I was just thinking about this. You know what? Authentication sounds an awful lot like something that would be needed to give you permission to buy or sell something. Doesn't it? So, Now, taking the mark has eternal complications. Revelation 14 says, "And the smoke of their torment," the people who have taken the mark, "the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name." Now, keep in mind, there have been tons of theories about this over the years. There's every year somebody else has got some new thing. So don't you go around telling everybody, "I've figured out what the mark of the beast is." No. I have not done that. I remember 40 years ago, Pastor Chuck telling us about electronic funds transfer. And for a while, some of us were afraid of getting those things called ATM cards because they got numbers on them. And what if it's the number of the beast or something like that? And we were afraid that we might accidentally be getting the number of the beast if we had an ATM card. Does everybody in here use ATM cards, by the way? I don't even carry cash anymore. Everything's on plastic, It's much cooler, right? It's much cooler. Pay attention, gang. Taking the mark, I do not believe, is something you do accidentally. It's a conscious choice. If you read Revelation 14:11, it's connected to those who worship the beast. Taking the mark is something people will do. They will choose to worship the Antichrist and to take this mark. The thing you ought to be afraid of is not the technology. It's the Antichrist. I don't suspect personally that we're going to be around for the mark. I tend to believe that we'll be in heaven because of the rapture. Because I don't think the Antichrist will be revealed to the world till we're gone. That's my theory. The best thing you and I can do to ensure ourselves against the mark is to worship Jesus Christ, not the Antichrist. You stay close to Jesus, you got nothing to worry about. Amen? Okay. There's plenty of... The technology, though, on the other hand, is around. It could be anything, whether it's RFID chips or... What was the thing I was thinking about the other day? Do you know I can buy myself my skinny caramel latte at Starbucks with my phone? I pop up the little app, and they scan the little thing on there. What if the mark of the beast or the number of his name is his phone number? Look, the technology is in place. It could be anything. But the thing you want to worry about is you just stay close to Jesus, and you're okay. Last nation, I want to talk about one more nation. That's the nation of Israel. One of the things we tend to overlook when we think about prophecies and looking at the times that we are in is overlooking the greatest one of them all, and that's the existence of the nation of Israel. Most of us accept the fact that Israel's a nation just because it's always been there, right? It's always been a nation. In fact, everybody here, how many people have been born? I know there's about half a dozen of you that won't do this. How many of you have been born after 1948? Okay, so most of you are going to be raising your hands. And for you, the nation of Israel has always existed. It's always been around. But friends, before 1948, Israel had not existed for almost 2,000 years. Ezekiel pointed out the rebirth of the nation. Ezekiel 37:12. He wrote, "Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel." And he talks about the rebirth of a nation. Israel's very existence, friends, tells us that we are in the last days. If you were to come away with only one thing today that shows you that you and I are living in that time period just before the coming of the Lord, it's this, friends. Now, maybe that's been 65 years, but I'll get to that in a minute. We are in the last days, friends. Another thing I want to talk about Israel is what's called Aliyah. Israelis have this term that refers to the return of the Jews from around the world to the land of Israel, and they call this Aliyah. The Bible says that it would happen in the last days, not just the rebirth of the nation, but the coming of Jews from all around the world to Israel. Zechariah 10 says, I will whistle for them. I will whistle for them, for I will redeem them, and they shall increase as they once increased. I will sow them among the peoples, and they shall remember me in far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. This has been happening since the early 20th century. And after 1948, when the nation was established, Aliyah exploded. The Jewish Agency reports that Aliyah is on the rise. This news thing is dated December 29th, 2013. So that's just a couple days ago. They revealed this last Sunday that as much as 7% has increased. 19,200 people arrived in Israel to become citizens in 2013, a 7% increase since 2012. Jews have immigrated from all over the world, from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Australia, Russia, Ethiopia, among other nations, from all around the world. The thing I want to talk about Israel is the peace talks. The peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians have resumed after a couple years hiatus. It resumed last July. Even this week, Secretary Kerry arrived on Thursday back in Israel. It's like 3-4 days ago. He went back to Israel to continue the talks. Their hope is to first try and produce a broad framework for the peace talks and then fill in the details. Here's Secretary Kerry.
I will never compromise on the security of Israel and its citizens and on the vital interests that protect our future. I think you know, John, more than most, how important it is to ensure the security of Israel. And I hope that despite the shifting sands in the Middle East, together we can build a rock-solid foundation for security and for a secure peace. That's the job we're going to do in the coming days and weeks. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bibi. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, my friend Bibi. I think it's safe to say that we know what the issues are. We know the parameters and the possibilities of peace. And as I said not so many months ago at Ben Gurion Airport as I left, the time is soon arriving where leaders are going to have to make difficult decisions. We are close to that time, if not at it. And I think we understand the circumstances within which we are working. I know, I come here with no illusions. I know that there are many who are skeptical of whether or not the two parties can achieve peace. But I will tell you that I have personally learned something about the power of reconciliation.
It was the power of reconciliation. It is, I'd like to suggest to you, this is just something to think about. Your pastor's kind of weird. I just want to throw out a wild idea. That if an actual peace agreement is made, and I'm skeptical that it'll happen, I wonder if it could be the covenant that marks the beginning of the tribulation period known as Daniel's 70th week. It's talked about in Daniel 9:27. Then he, which is talking about the Antichrist, he shall confirm a covenant, a treaty with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now that verse talks about a bazillion things. This is the verse that zeroes in, that tells us that the tribulation period is a 7-year period. It's what's called a week long. That's a whole nother discussion. Look up our notes on Daniel chapter 9, because I'm pretty sure I covered all that stuff when we were in Daniel chapter 9. What I just want to bring out is that this period is marked by a covenant between Israel and the many. I wonder, what if there's a peace plan put in place, could that be this covenant? Now, here's where I'm really going to go off the deep end. I found this really freaky thing yesterday. It's a strange video of an Egyptian astrologer. Guy's an astrologer. He's, from Egypt. He talks about the warnings that the stars predict that the Jews will be stronger in 2014. Now, just hold on. I don't promote astrology. I believe it's hooey. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just actually, I don't know if you can listen to it. You're going to have to read the translation unless you know. Does anybody in here know Egyptian? Well, we do have a translation here. Let me read. Saturn will enter the fire sign of Sagittarius. My late father and I have had a long history with Saturn entering fire signs. As Sheikh Daoud al-Antaki wrote, when Saturn enters any of the fire signs, the Jews grow stronger. Don't believe this merely because I say so. It's been tested. Now, the guy goes on, and he goes on to document this strange astrology stuff and how over the years, whenever this certain thing happens, that the Jews have all these victories. It's, the Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War. All these things happen when this fire sign thing happened. And in the end, this guy recommends that the Palestinian Authority hurry up and make peace with Israel before they get into worse trouble. I just had to laugh at that. I just thought it was hilarious. I do not believe in astrology. The Bible forbids us to be part of astrology. Don't even touch this stuff. The enemy will suck you in. But I wonder if something wacky like this could influence this peace process. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Gideon. When Gideon was afraid to go face the Midianites, and God told Gideon to take a buddy with him and go down and sneak into the camp of the Midianites and just hear what they're talking about. And these people were talking about their dreams and their strange ideas, and they were actually afraid of Gideon, and it all encouraged Gideon, and it made the Midianites terrified. I just wonder if the same thing isn't going on, where God's using something wacky to help move this thing along. I just wonder. Watch the peace talks. Personally, I think it's very doubtful that an agreement will be reached. It hasn't happened since 1948. They've been at war with everybody since 1948. But if one is reached, things could get exciting. You follow me? So what? For some of us, this stuff gets a little bit old. It's like hearing the same thing over and over again. Jesus is coming back soon. Oh yeah, Pastor Rich, you've been telling us that for 20 years. And if I heard you correctly, Pastor Chuck's been telling us this for 40, 45 years, 50 years. What was the last book we just finished studying? Hosea. There you go. We saw that Hosea's ministry started in the last year of Jeroboam II's reign, which is 753 BC, and he warned the people over and over that the nation was going to be judged. And judgment came in 722 BC, 31 years later. And every year, Hosea gets up and does his prophecy update and says, watch out, we're facing judgment. And the people say, buddy, you've been saying that for 29 and a half years. Jeremiah, his ministry started in 627 BC, and it would be 41 years before the fall of Judah. We just read through, we're in Genesis right now in our daily reading, and read about Noah. And the way I take, there's a phrase in chapter 6, I think that Noah preached for 120 years. I think God warned the world for 120 years before the flood. And my point is that God is giving the world a lot of time to wake up and turn around. It almost seems to me when you look at these things, the bigger the judgment, the longer he waits. But the warnings still come. Friends, any day now, just be patient. Stay the course. Keep following him. And be ready. Jesus talked about his second coming to his disciples on his last night before dying on the cross. And he told them in Matthew 24, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark." In other words, life was just like normal. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. Watch, therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. You never know when a thief is going to strike. They don't send you an email. Tomorrow at 2 a.m. we will be emptying your house of treasures. They don't do that. They just show up. We do not know when the Lord will return. And I'm not going to be foolish and try to tell you when he's returning, because nobody knows. Nobody knows. The Bible does tell you that you ought to be ready and live as if he's coming any moment. For some of us, his coming might be with our death. There are some people in our church who are no longer with us this year. Just yesterday, a beloved sister lost her husband, they've been coming to our church this year. Massive heart attack yesterday morning. And he's gone. And he's in heaven right now. And I'm not trying to get dramatic, I'm not trying to scare you, but it's the truth. I could sit up here and tell you about, there, you got another 20, 30 years. Don't worry about it. Just live your life, enjoy, have fun, But friends, he could come back at any moment, and this might be how you will see him face to face. It can happen at any time. We had a fellow named Bill who used to come to our church back in the early days when we used to meet at the YMCA. And Bill wasn't a believer when we first met him, and he would sit outside of the gymnasium while we would have church, and he would hear the messages down the hallway, and then he would move his chair up a little bit closer until the day we was sitting right outside the door to the YMCA, And then came a day where he actually went through the door and sat in the back of the room. Oh my goodness, we were all thrilled. And then came a day when one of the elders of the church, John Osmundson, who is also no longer with us, John got to lead him to the Lord. My goodness, were we so excited. 2 weeks later, Bill is kind of a homeless kind of guy. He was out riding his bike at midnight, riding from the Commons, the Cal State Commons, down Chapman, right here in front of this church. Was hit by a car, hit and run, and he was gone. You just never know. That's truth. That's the truth. You never know. You and I ought to live as if we're ready at any time. For some of us, if we are as close to the end as we think is possible, hey, it could be in the rapture, in the blink of an eye. You might be totally healthy, and boom, you will see him face to face. Are you ready? Are you ready? Last thing I want to leave you with is this. Obey for the joy. Don't obey out of fear. Jesus told a parable to give us an idea about how we're supposed to live our lives while we wait for his return. He talked about a wealthy man who was going to go away on a long journey, and before he leaves, he divides his wealth among 3 of his servants, and he asks them to each take care of a portion of his wealth. And wealth in those days was measured with a weight. The weight was called a talent, which is about 75 pounds of gold. One fellow he gave 5 talents, another fellow he gave 2 talents, and another fellow he gave 1 talent. He says, you watch over my money while I'm gone. Matthew 25 says, and after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. So his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid. Went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there, you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. I ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received my own, at least with some interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more will be given, and he who will have abundance, but from him who does not have even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, my concern is that some of you today will come away from today with fear. I'm just afraid the Lord's going to come back at any moment. You're afraid of what's around the corner. Friend, God is around the corner. What in the world are you afraid of? One day, you're going to meet him face to face. And are you looking forward to that day? Or is it, no, not yet. I got a few things I want to do. You got to be kidding me. It's more important than meeting God. Isaiah writes, Isaiah 25:9, and it will be said in that day, behold, This is our God. We have waited for him, and he will save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation. Listen to me, friends. God would prefer that you learn to serve him for the joy and not out of fear. What you do for the Lord takes on a whole different flavor when you're serving him out of joy. He is the one who loved you so much that he gave his only begotten Son. Jesus paid a price he didn't owe. Because I owed a price I couldn't pay. Someone who loved you this much, how can you not follow him? Obey for the joy, my friends. Let's stand and pray. Lord, this is a time of year when we often reevaluate our priorities and we think about what's important. And that's a good practice. Lord, help us not to write you out of the list of what's important in our lives. And Lord, help us to set things straight in our hearts. That it's not out of fear that we would serve you, but that we would serve you from joy, looking towards the joy. And with every head bowed, every eye closed, let me ask you a question. Are you ready? Are you ready? If you want to be ready, could you raise your hand so I can pray for you? All right. God bless you, and you, and you, and you. Yes, yes, and you. Absolutely. Pray this with me. Lord God, I need you. And I am so blown away to think that you love me. You say that you paid for my sins. So, Lord, could you forgive me? I open up my heart today to you. Help me to follow you. Help me to keep my eyes on you. Help me to turn things around that need to be turned around. And not to do it out of fear, but for the joy to hear you say, well done. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's end with a song.